The last thing my mother ever said to me before I left home was, "You're just wasting space here." I was 19 years old. No job. No college degree. No money. And according to my family, no future. My older brother was the golden child. My younger sister was the miracle baby. Me? I was the kid everyone forgot until they needed someone to blame. So one rainy afternoon, I packed everything I owned into 2 old duffel bags, walked out the front door, and promised myself I'd never ask my family for anything again. For 11 years. I kept that promise. I built a business from scratch. Worked 18-hour days. Slept in my car. Lost everything. Then built it all back again. Until one day, I bought the kind of beachfront villa I'd only ever seen in magazines. The funny part? My family had no idea it belonged to me. Then one Sunday afternoon, my mother drove past that house. She got out, looked through the front gate, and when she saw me standing on the balcony, she froze. Because the son she once called a waste of space had become the one person she never thought she'd need. And what happened next changed our family forever. The son nobody believed in. People think the worst thing your parents can do is stop loving you. They're wrong. The worst thing they can do is convince you that you're impossible to love. My name is Ryan Carter, and for most of my childhood, I believed I was the problem. Not because anyone ever said those exact words. Because they didn't have to. The way they looked at me. The way they spoke to me. The way they celebrated everyone else while barely noticing I existed. It told me everything I needed to know. I was the middle child. My older brother, Daniel, was the family's pride. Straight A student. Captain of the basketball team. Student body president. The kind of kid teachers bragged about at parent-teacher conferences. Every trophy he won had its own shelf in our living room. Every achievement was framed on the wall. Then there was my younger sister, Sophie. She was born 6 years after me. According to Mom, she was our little miracle. She got away with everything. If she broke something, it was an accident. If she forgot her homework, she was just overwhelmed. If she wanted something expensive, Mom somehow found a way to make it happen. Then there was me. I wasn't a troublemaker. I didn't skip school. I didn't get into fights. I wasn't lazy. I was just different. While Daniel loved textbooks, I loved taking things apart. Old radios. Broken fans. Lawnmowers people threw away. Anything with screws, wires, or an engine fascinated me. I wanted to know how things worked. Sometimes I could spend 6 hours fixing an old machine just to see if I could make it run again. My room looked more like a workshop than a bedroom. To me, it was exciting. To my parents, it was junk. Mom hated walking past my room. She'd stop in the hallway, shake her head, and say, "One day you're going to have to grow up." Dad usually agreed. "Your brother studies. You collect trash." Neither of them understood that I wasn't collecting trash. I was teaching myself skills no one else was willing to teach me. But when people have already decided who you are, they stop paying attention to who you're becoming. By the time I turned 16, I had started fixing broken lawnmowers and bicycles for people in the neighborhood. At first, I didn't even charge. I just enjoyed solving problems. Eventually, one of our neighbors insisted on paying me $20. It wasn't much. But it was the first dollar I'd ever earned doing something I genuinely loved. Within a few months, word spread. Every weekend, someone would knock on our garage door. "Ryan, can you take a look at this?" Sometimes it was a weed trimmer. Sometimes it was an old generator. Sometimes it was a pressure washer that everyone else had given up on. Most of the time. I fixed it. Little by little. I started saving money. Not for video games. Not for clothes. For tools. Every birthday card from my grandparents became another wrench. Another drill. Another socket set. I wasn't trying to build a hobby. I was trying to build a future. Unfortunately, my parents couldn't see it. One Saturday morning, I was rebuilding the engine of an old riding mower when Mom walked into the garage. She looked around in disgust. Oil stains on the floor. Parts laid out neatly across the workbench. My toolbox sitting open. She sighed loudly. "When are you going to clean this mess?" "It's organized." She laughed. "No, Ryan. It's garbage." I wiped my hands on an old towel. "The owner is picking it up this afternoon." She folded her arms. "And how much are you making?" $300. She actually laughed. 300? You spent 2 days on it. You'd make more money working at a grocery store. Maybe she was right. Maybe I could have earned more stocking shelves. But I wasn't just earning money. I was learning. Something she never understood. She looked at the mower one last time before saying, "You know, Daniel is applying for engineering scholarships. I wish you'd put this much effort into a real future." I didn't answer. There wasn't any point. Because no matter what I accomplished, someone else had always done it better. That afternoon, the owner of the mower arrived. Mr. Henderson. A retired contractor who'd lived down the street for years. He started the mower. The engine purred like it had just rolled off the factory floor. He smiled. "I've taken this thing to 3 repair shops. They all told me to replace it." He reached into his wallet. Instead of handing me $300, he handed me $500. "I told you 300. "I know." He smiled. "But your work is worth more." Before leaving, he looked at my parents, who were watching from the porch. Then he said something I'd never forget. "Your son has a gift. You should encourage him." Mom forced a polite smile. "We're trying to encourage him to choose a real career." Mr. Henderson looked at me. Then back at her. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. After he drove away, Mom walked back inside without saying a single word. Not, "I'm proud of you." Not, "Good job." Nothing. That night, while everyone ate dinner, Dad couldn't stop talking about Daniel's acceptance into another honors program. Sophie showed everyone a drawing she'd made at school. Mom hung it on the refrigerator immediately. Then Dad looked at me. "So, what did you do today?" Before I could answer, Mom replied for me. "He played with engines." The table laughed. Even Sophie giggled. I forced a smile. Because correcting them never changed anything. I quietly finished my dinner, washed my plate, and went back out to the garage. Sometimes, the only place I felt understood was surrounded by machines. At least when something was broken, it didn't pretend everything was fine. It either worked or it didn't. People were much harder to figure out. That night, as I locked up the garage, I noticed an old man standing across the street watching me. He wasn't from the neighborhood. He smiled, walked over, and asked a question that would completely change the direction of my life. "Son, how would you like to turn that little garage into a real business?" The stranger with the opportunity of a lifetime. The old man waited patiently. He wasn't dressed like a businessman. No expensive suit. No flashy watch. Just faded jeans, work boots, and a weathered baseball cap. He looked more like someone who had spent his entire life building things with his own hands. I wiped the grease from my fingers. I'm sorry, do I know you? He smiled. No. But I know who you are. That caught me off guard. You fixed Mr. Henderson's riding mower. I nodded. He talks. The old man chuckled. He hasn't stopped talking about you for 3 days. He extended his hand. My name's Frank Sullivan. I shook it. Ryan. I know. Frank glanced inside the garage. His eyes slowly moved across my workbench. Every tool had its place. Every bolt was sorted into labeled containers. Half-finished projects sat neatly along the wall. Instead of seeing a messy garage, he saw exactly what I saw. Potential. You built all this yourself? The shelves? The workbench? The storage racks? Yeah. He nodded approvingly. Most kids your age would have bought video games. You bought tools. I shrugged. I like fixing things. No. He corrected me. You like solving problems. I'd never thought of it that way before. But he was right. Machines were just puzzles. Every strange noise. Every leak. Every engine that refused to start. There was always a reason. You just had to find it. Frank looked back at me. I own a marine repair shop about 30 minutes from here. My eyebrows lifted. Marine? Boats. Jet skis. Outboard engines. Generators. Anything that floats. I've been looking for an apprentice. I blinked. Me? I've interviewed 6 people this month. They all had certificates. They all talked a good game. But none of them had what you have. And what's that? He smiled. Curiosity. You can't teach curiosity. You either have it. Or you don't. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. Someone believed in me. Not because I was family. Not because they had to. Because they'd seen my work. I appreciate the offer. I said carefully. But I still have school. Good. Finish it. I'm talking about weekends. Summer. After class. No pressure. Just come learn. He reached into his pocket and handed me a business card. The logo read, Sullivan Marine and Engine Repair. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Saturday. 8 a.m. If you're serious. He tipped his cap. I'll see you then. And with that, he climbed into an old pickup truck and drove away. At dinner the next evening, I decided to tell my parents. I honestly thought they'd be happy. I waited until everyone had finished eating. Then I said, I got offered an apprenticeship. Dad looked up. Doing what? Marine engine repair. Mom frowned immediately. Repair? It's a paid apprenticeship. I'd learn from someone who's been in business for 40 years. Dad took a sip of water. And how much does it pay? Not much at first. It's more about the experience. Mom sighed. There it is. What? The problem. I frowned. What problem? You keep chasing hobbies instead of careers. It's not a hobby. It could become a business. Daniel laughed from across the table. Fixing boats? Seriously? It's skilled work. He smirked. Or you could just go to college like everyone else. I looked at Dad. What do you think? He didn't even hesitate. I think your mother is right. There it was again. Not one question about the opportunity. Not one question about the man offering it. Not one ounce of curiosity. Just dismissal. Mom pushed her plate away. Ryan. You've always been good with your hands. But that's not enough. You need a real future. I wanted to argue. I wanted to explain that skilled trades were real careers. That businesses started somewhere. That every mechanic, electrician, and technician had once been an apprentice. But I already knew how the conversation would end. So I simply nodded. Okay. Mom smiled. I'm glad you understand. The funny thing was, she thought I'd agreed with her. I hadn't. I'd simply stopped trying to convince people who had already made up their minds. Saturday morning arrived. I left the house before sunrise. No one noticed. At exactly 7:55, I pulled into the parking lot of Sullivan Marine. The shop sat just a few hundred yards from the ocean. The salty breeze carried the smell of diesel fuel and seawater. Boats of every size lined the docks. Some looked brand new. Others looked like they'd survived hurricanes. Frank was already there. Coffee in one hand. Clipboard in the other. He smiled the moment he saw me. I wasn't sure you'd come. I almost didn't. What changed your mind? I looked around the yard filled with broken engines waiting to be repaired. Then I smiled. I realized. This is exactly where I belong. Frank laughed. Good answer. He handed me a pair of work gloves. Rule number 1. There are no shortcuts. Rule number 2. If you make a mistake, you own it. And rule number 3? He grinned. Never stop asking why. Those 3 rules would shape the rest of my life. Over the next few weeks, I learned more than I had in years of reading books. How to rebuild marine engines. How to diagnose electrical failures. How to speak with customers. How to run a business. Frank didn't just teach me mechanics. He taught me responsibility. He treated me like someone worth investing in. Something I'd rarely felt at home. Then, one Friday afternoon, while we were closing the shop, Frank walked into his office carrying a folder. He placed it on the desk in front of me. Inside were blueprints, business plans, financial projections. I looked at him, confused. What is this? He smiled. My retirement plan. I frowned. I don't understand. He leaned back in his chair. Then he said something that changed my future forever. One day, Ryan, I'd like you to own this business. The dream my family laughed at. I honestly thought Frank was joking. I looked at him. Then at the folder. Then back at him. You want me to own the shop? Frank smiled. Not tomorrow. Not next year. But one day. I laughed nervously. I'm 17. I still live with my parents. I don't even have enough money to buy a decent used truck. He leaned against his desk. Do you know how old I was when I started this business? I shook my head. 21. Do you know how much money I had? No. $212. I couldn't help smiling. Seriously? He nodded. And an old toolbox my father left me. He looked around the shop. This place wasn't built with money. It was built with trust. One customer. Then another. And another. He tapped the folder. I've watched hundreds of young people come through these doors. Some had college degrees. Some had perfect resumes. But very few cared the way you do. I looked down at the blueprints. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just keep learning. Over the next year, my life settled into a routine. School. The marine shop. Homework. Sleep. Repeat. While my classmates spent weekends at parties, I spent mine rebuilding boat engines. And I loved every minute of it. The work was hard. Some days I came home covered in grease from head to toe. Other days my hands were covered in tiny cuts from stubborn bolts and sharp metal. But every repair taught me something new. More importantly, Frank trusted me. Little by little, he stopped checking every repair I made. He let me talk to customers, write invoices, order parts, even diagnose problems on my own. One afternoon, a customer brought in a luxury speedboat. 3 other repair shops had failed to fix it. The engine kept shutting down without warning. Frank handed me the keys. What do you think? I spent nearly 4 hours tracing wires, checking sensors, and testing fuel pressure. Finally, I found it. A tiny crack in a wiring connector. A part that cost less than $15. Once I replaced it, the engine ran perfectly. The customer couldn't believe it. He smiled and shook my hand. Kid, you just saved me $20,000. Before leaving, he slipped $500 into my shirt pocket. I don't accept tips. You do today. I tried to hand it back. He refused. Frank watched the whole thing without saying a word. As the customer drove away, he smiled. You know why he paid you? I shrugged. Because I fixed it? No. Because you listened. He told you the engine only failed after it warmed up. The other shops ignored him. You didn't. That lesson stayed with me. Customers don't just pay for repairs. They pay to feel heard. By the time I graduated high school, I'd saved nearly $30,000. Every extra dollar went into a separate account. Frank called it my future fund. My parents called it something else. Money you're wasting. The graduation ceremony was exactly what I expected. Mom cried when Daniel received another academic award. Dad took dozens of pictures. Sophie cheered from the front row. When my name was called, they clapped politely. Nothing more. That evening, we had dinner together. Dad looked at me. So, which college finally accepted you? I put down my fork. I'm not going. The table went silent. Mom frowned. What do you mean? I'm staying at Sullivan Marine. I want to do this full time. Daniel laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. You're throwing away your future. I'm building one. No. He shook his head. You're choosing the easy way out. I looked at him. You've never rebuilt an engine in your life. So don't tell me what's easy. Mom interrupted before the conversation got worse. Ryan. You can still change your mind. No. I've already signed my employment contract. Dad stared at me for several seconds. Then he slowly shook his head. I expected more from you. Those 5 words hurt. Not because I doubted myself, but because I realized something. Nothing I ever achieved would be enough, as long as it didn't fit the future they had imagined for me. That night, I went out to the garage one last time. Most of my tools were already packed. The room that had once been my sanctuary looked strangely empty. I ran my hand across the old workbench I'd built when I was 15. Every scratch told a story. Every stain reminded me of a project. Then Mom walked into the garage. She looked around. So, you're really leaving? I found a small apartment near the marina. She nodded. I suppose there's nothing I can say to change your mind. I smiled sadly. No. For a moment. Neither of us spoke. Then she sighed. I just don't want to see you fail. I looked at her. What if I don't? She forced a smile. We'll see. Those 2 words stayed with me as I loaded the last box into my truck. Not I'm proud of you. Not good luck. Just, we'll see. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw my parents standing on the porch. Dad had already gone back inside. Mom watched until I disappeared around the corner. Neither of them realized that would be the last time I'd live under their roof. And over the next 10 years, everything they believed about my future would be proven wrong. The business they said would never last. The first apartment I rented was barely 600 square feet. The kitchen and living room were basically the same room. The air conditioner only worked when it felt like it. And every time it rained, the window above my bed leaked. But I loved that apartment. Not because it was beautiful. Because every bill was paid by me. Every piece of furniture had been bought with money I'd earned. Every key on that ring represented freedom. I wasn't living off my parents anymore. I wasn't asking anyone for permission. For the first time in my life, my future belonged to me. Working with Frank wasn't glamorous. Most mornings started before sunrise. By 6 o'clock, we were already unloading engines from trucks or inspecting damaged boats at the marina. Some days we worked until 9 or 10 at night. There were weekends without a single day off. Holidays became just another workday. Customers didn't care if it was Christmas. If their boat broke down, they wanted it fixed. Frank had a saying. People remember two things: who solved their problem and who wasted their time. So we never wasted anyone's time. If we promised Friday, it was ready Friday. If we couldn't fix something, we admitted it. That honesty became our biggest advertisement. Within 2 years, customers weren't just coming from our town. They were driving in from neighboring counties. Then from neighboring states. The waiting list kept getting longer. One afternoon, Frank called me into his office. He spread a stack of papers across the desk. Look at these. I frowned. What am I looking at? Last year's numbers. I scanned the pages. Revenue had nearly doubled. I looked up. We're doing really well. Frank smiled. We're doing too well. What do you mean? We're turning away customers. He pointed toward the yard outside. Every repair bay was full. Boats were lined up along the fence. There simply wasn't enough space. I'd been thinking. He paused. I want to build a second location. I smiled. That's amazing. It will be. He said. If you help me run it. My heart skipped. You trust me with that? I trusted you the day you showed up 15 minutes early for your first shift. Construction began 6 months later. I spent almost every evening at the new property. Measuring. Planning. Installing equipment. Painting walls. Building workbenches. It felt like watching a dream come to life. The day we opened the second shop, more than 100 customers showed up. By noon, we were completely booked. Frank stood beside me, watching cars pull into the parking lot. You know what the funny part is? What? 10 years ago, people told me expanding was too risky. He smiled. The people who never take risks usually have the strongest opinions about them. I laughed. That sounded familiar. Around that same time, Daniel came home for Thanksgiving. He had graduated from college with honors. Mom couldn't stop talking about him. He got hired by one of the biggest consulting firms in the state. Dad looked proud. We always knew he'd do great things. Then Dad looked at me. So, how's the boat job? Boat job. After 5 years. That's still what he called it. It's good. What does good mean? We opened a second location. Mom blinked. You own it? Not yet. But I manage it. Daniel smiled politely. Well, at least you've got steady work. At least. Those 2 words always seem to follow me. At least you've got a job. At least you're happy. At least you're trying. Nobody asked how many employees I managed. Nobody asked how much the business had grown. Nobody asked if I was proud. They'd already decided what success looked like. And because my path looked different, it didn't count. I stopped trying to explain. 3 years later, Frank called me into his office again. This time, he looked tired. Older. He slowly placed a folder on the desk. The same folder he'd shown me years earlier. Only now, there were legal documents inside. I think it's time. I looked at him. For what? He smiled. I'm retiring. I froze. I can't imagine this place without you. You won't have to. He slid the paperwork across the desk. I'm selling the business. I nodded. I figured. Then he looked me straight in the eye. But not to strangers. My heart started racing. What are you saying? I want you to buy it. I stared at him in disbelief. Frank. I don't have that kind of money. He smiled. I know exactly how much money you have. I frowned. How? He laughed. Because I've been helping your accountant every year. I couldn't help smiling. You've been spying on me? I've been preparing you. He leaned forward. You've spent 10 years proving yourself. You've earned this. I'll finance the rest. I couldn't speak. The man who'd believed in me before anyone else was handing me the opportunity of a lifetime. 6 months later, the papers were signed. At 29 years old, I officially became the owner of Sullivan Marine and Engine Repair. Frank shook my hand, then pulled me into a hug. I'm proud of you, son. Those 5 words were everything I'd spent my childhood hoping to hear. And strangely, they didn't come from my father. They came from the man who chose to believe in me. Over the next 2 years, I expanded again. Then again. By the time I turned 31, we had 4 locations along the coast. More than 80 employees. And contracts with luxury yacht companies. Business had become better than I ever imagined. One afternoon, after signing our biggest contract yet, my real estate agent handed me a folder. I think I found the perfect house. I laughed. I've seen 30 houses already. You haven't seen this one. She smiled. It's right on the beach. I looked at the photos. White stone walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A private dock. An infinity pool overlooking the ocean. It was breathtaking. I asked the obvious question. Who could afford something like this? She smiled. You can. 3 weeks later, I signed the papers. The beachfront villa was finally mine. What I didn't know was that just a month later, my mother would drive past that very house. Completely unaware that the son she once called a waste of space was standing on its balcony. The house they never thought I'd own. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the ocean behind us. The waves rolled in, then disappeared again. Just like the years we'd lost. I looked at my parents. So, what do you need? Dad took a deep breath. The company I worked for closed. I know. He looked surprised. You knew? I read the news. He nodded slowly. I found another job. But it pays less than half of what I used to make. Mom quietly continued. We've been trying to keep the house. But between the mortgage, medical bills, and Sophie's tuition. She couldn't finish the sentence. We're drowning. I listened without interrupting. For the first time in my life, they weren't telling me what I should become. They were simply telling me the truth. Dad looked down. I swallowed my pride before coming here. I wasn't sure you'd even open the gate. I almost didn't. I answered honestly. He nodded. I don't blame you. Another silence settled between us. Then Mom whispered. We're not asking for a handout. We're asking for a chance. I looked at them carefully. A chance to do what? To fix what we broke. Her voice cracked. We know we failed you. I know saying sorry doesn't erase years of hurt. But if you can. She wiped away a tear. Please give us one opportunity to earn your trust. Those words felt different. Not because they were emotional. Because they didn't come with excuses. No one blamed stress. No one blamed money. No one blamed me. Just responsibility. I invited them inside. Mom walked through the villa slowly. She stopped in front of a wall filled with framed photos. Most weren't of boats. Or awards. They were pictures of my employees. Company barbecues. Volunteer events. Scholarship winners. Frank and his wife at their retirement party. Dad looked confused. I thought these would be business awards. I smiled. The business exists because of people. Not trophies. Frank's favorite lesson. Still hanging on my wall. We sat on the back patio overlooking the ocean. After a few minutes, I asked the question I'd carried for years. Can I ask you something? Dad nodded. Anything. I looked straight at Mom. When I was 19. Did you really believe I was wasting space? She closed her eyes. For several seconds. She couldn't answer. Finally. She whispered. No. I frowned. Then why say it? She stared at the waves. Because I was scared. I thought if I pushed you hard enough, you'd choose the life I imagined for you. She looked at me. I didn't realize. I was pushing you away instead. Dad spoke quietly. I agreed with her because it was easier than arguing. He shook his head. I failed you too. For the first time. I believed them. Not because they cried. Not because they apologized. Because neither of them tried to defend what they'd done. They simply owned it. A few weeks later. I drove to the house I'd grown up in. The lawn looked smaller than I remembered. The garage looked older. I walked inside. Almost everything was the same. Except one thing. The old workbench. It was gone. Mom noticed me looking. We kept it. She smiled. It's in the basement. She led me downstairs. There it was. Every scratch. Every stain. Exactly as I'd left it. Dad laughed softly. Your mother wouldn't let me throw it away. Mom smiled through tears. I couldn't. It reminded me of the sun I never took the time to understand. I ran my hand across the wood. Then smiled. It helped build everything. Over the next year. Things changed. Slowly. Not magically. Trust doesn't return overnight. It returns one honest conversation at a time. Dad found steady work managing operations for a local marina. Not because I hired him. Because I introduced him to someone who needed his experience. He earned the job himself. Mom started volunteering at a trade school that taught automotive and marine repair. Every semester. She quietly paid for one student's tools. She called it her way of making sure no young dream was dismissed the way mine had been. Sophie graduated from college and became a pediatric nurse. Daniel eventually admitted something he'd never said before. You know, I spent years trying to become the son Mom and Dad wanted. He smiled. You became the man you wanted. I think you won. I laughed. This was never a competition. No. He nodded. It never should have been. One evening, I invited the whole family to the villa for dinner. The same patio. The same ocean. The same sunset. Halfway through the meal, Mom reached into her purse. She placed a small envelope beside my plate. Inside was an old photograph. It showed a 16-year-old version of me standing proudly beside the first lawnmower I'd ever repaired. I looked confused. I've never seen this. Mom smiled. I took it through the kitchen window. You looked so happy. So why didn't you show me? Tears filled her eyes. Because I thought if I celebrated that dream, you'd never chase the future I wanted. She shook her head. I was so busy trying to shape your life. I forgot to appreciate the one you were already building. I reached across the table and took her hand. I can't change the past. Neither can you. But we can decide what happens next. She nodded, smiling through tears. Today, that old garage workbench sits inside my company's headquarters. Not because it's valuable. Because it reminds every apprentice who walks through our doors that greatness doesn't always begin in a fancy office. Sometimes, it begins in a cluttered garage. With someone everyone else underestimated. Every year, our company sponsors scholarships for young people who choose skilled trades instead of traditional college. Not because college isn't valuable. It is. But talent doesn't follow just one path. Some people build software. Some build bridges. And some build engines. None of those dreams deserve less respect than the others. As for the beachfront villa, people often stop outside to admire it. They see the ocean, the cars, the dock, the success. What they don't see is the scared 19-year-old who once carried 2 duffel bags out of his parents' house with nothing but a toolbox and a promise to himself. Because that young man built all of this. Not with luck. Not with shortcuts. But with persistence. And every time I walk onto that balcony, I remember the words my mother once said. You're just wasting space here. She was wrong. I wasn't wasting space. I was simply waiting for the place where I truly belonged.